Hi, friends. I am so excited to start reading this story with you. This book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The author is Roald Dahl, and the illustrator is Quentin Blake. Many of you may have heard of this story before. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There have actually been two movies made about it, and it's a very, very popular book. And it's popular for a reason. It's popular because it's clever and funny, and there are so many great characters and stories within the story. So I really hope that you guys enjoy this. If you have seen the movies, I just want you to know that the book is different. Different things happen, we get more details, and it is so fun to read and to listen to. I wanted to show you the back of the book. On the back of the book, we have a little message. It says, "Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket." And here we can see Charlie holding his golden ticket. So this book is called Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Let's open it up. So right here, we have the dedication. This dedication says, "For Theo." A dedication is a really important part of a book. The author gets to decide who they want to dedicate the book to. It could be one person, it could be a group of people, it could be a list of people. These are the people that inspired them to write the story. These are the people that the author knows are going to enjoy the story, or maybe they were thinking about this person or these people while they were writing the story. So that's what the dedication is. Then we have the table of contents. The table of contents lists all the names of all the chapters and which page they start on. So if I was rereading this book and I wanted to find a certain chapter, I could look for it and then know which page to go to. The contents also goes on to this back page. So here we're given a little bit of information about some of the characters in this book. There are 5 children in this book: Augustus Gloop, a greedy boy; Veruca Salt, a girl who is spoiled by her parents; Violet Beauregard, a girl who chews gum all day long; Mike TV, a boy who does nothing but watch television; and Charlie Bucket, the hero. Chapter 1, Here Comes Charlie. These 2 very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these 2 very old people are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgia. Excuse me, it's Georgina. This is Mr. Bucket. This is Mrs. Bucket. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He is pleased to meet you. So Charlie is talking to us, the reader. He's saying, how do you do? He's pleased to meet us. Sounds like he's a nice kid. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket lived together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so tired they never got out of it. Let's take a moment to let that sink in. We have 4 grandparents who are so old and tired that they never get out of bed. This picture helps us picture where they are living. It does look pretty small. Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine on this side. Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room upon mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house or even 1 more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long on a bench and screwed the little caps onto the tops of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But A toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money. And poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough to buy 1/2 of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible, empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all, and although his father and mother often went without their own share of lunch or supper so that they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled high up in the shop windows, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking creamy candy bars out of their pockets and munching them greedily, and that, of course, was pure torture. I wonder why it was torture for Charlie watching other kids eat chocolate. I'm thinking that it's because he isn't able to have some himself. That does sound awful. Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when that great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it, although it were a bar of solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it but never touch it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate. And then he would take a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread out slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so on. And in this way, Charlie would make his 10-cent bar of birthday chocolate last him more than a month. Wow. But I haven't yet told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything else. This thing for him was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop windows or watching other children munching creamy candy bars right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke belching from its chimneys, and strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside it. And outside the walls, for half a mile around in every direction, the air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous, chocolatey smell around him. Oh, how he loved the smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Same. So we are going to stop there, my friends. That was the first chapter of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. This was one of my favorite books as a child, and it was one of my favorite authors and still is one of my favorite authors. So I really, really hope that you guys enjoy reading it with me. I cannot wait to hear from you guys about what you think is going to happen next. We're also going to talk a little bit about Charlie. We're going to talk about what we know about Charlie and his family. So please be thinking about that. And I will be back soon with chapter 2 of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.